Not much time will be gained, O Athenians, in return for the evil name which you will get from the detractors of the city, who will say that you killed Socrates, a wise man. If you had waited a little while, your desire would have been fulfilled in the course of nature. For I am far advanced in years, and not far from death. I am speaking now only to those of you who have condemned me to death. You think that I was convicted through deficiency of words? Not so. The deficiency which led to my conviction was not of words. But I had not the boldness or impudence or inclination to address you as you would have liked me to address you, weeping and wailing and lamenting, and saying and doing many things which you have been accustomed to hear from others, and which, as I say, are unworthy of me. But I thought that I ought not to do anything common or mean in the hour of danger, nor do I now repent of the manner of my defense, and I would rather die having spoken after my manner than speak in your manner and live. For neither in war nor yet at law ought any man to use every way of escaping death. For often in battle there is no doubt that if a man will throw away his arms and fall on his knees before his pursuers, he may escape death. And in other dangers there are other ways of escaping death if a man is willing to say and do anything. The difficulty, my friends, is not in avoiding death, but in avoiding unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death. I am old and move slowly, and the slower runner has overtaken me, and my accusers are keen and quick, and the faster runner, whose unrighteousness has overtaken them. And now I depart, hence condemned by you to suffer the penalty of death, and they too go their ways condemned by the truth to suffer the penalty of villainy and wrong. And I must abide by my award, let them abide by theirs. I suppose that these things may be regarded as fated, and I think that they are well.
What is the virtue of the soul? When do our moral judgments reign superior to the law of the land? For some, it's a pretty hard question to answer, but for Socrates, he answers that question with everyday conversation and actions to support his philosophy. In the Apology by Plato, Socrates presents his defense to the Athenian jury who will be convicting him on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety.
But far more dangerous are these accusers who began when you were children and took possession of your minds with their falsehoods, telling of one, Socrates, a wise man who speculated about the heaven above and searched into the earth beneath, and made the worse appear the better cause. And there are many accusers, and their charges against me are of ancient date, and they made them in days when you were impressible, in childhood, or perhaps in youth. And the cause when heard went by default, and there was none to answer.
Socrates begins with the charges Antinous brings forth. These charges are what Socrates believes are the oldest accusations of corrupting the young men of Athens. In his defense, he references Aristophanes, a comic poet, who created a play and a caricature of Socrates in his play, The Clouds, when Socrates was only in his 40s. Aware of the play's popularity and the respect Aristophanes has in Athens, Socrates argues that the play should not be taken as the truth. Socrates is defending himself in what seems like an uphill battle and acknowledges the preconceived notions and biases his jury may have on him because of the elaborate exaggeration of who Socrates is and what he does is seen in the ancient comedy. Finally getting to address his oldest charges, Socrates brings forward to the public why he lives a private, almost alienated life.
And here, O men of Athens, I must beg you not to interrupt me. If I seem to say something extravagant, for the word which I will speak is not mine, I will refer to you to a witness who was worthy of credit and will tell you about my wisdom, whether I have any and of what sort. And that witness shall be the god of Delphi. You must have known Chaerephon. He was early a friend of mine and also a friend of yours, for he shared in the exile of the people and returned with you. Well, Chaerephon, as you know, was very impetuous in all his doings, and he went to Delphi and boldly asked the oracle to tell him whether, as I was saying, and I must beg you not to interrupt, he asked the oracle to tell him whether there was anyone wiser than I was, and the Pythian prophetess answered that there was no man wiser.
Socrates is in disbelief, and it becomes his mission to prove to the gods that he is, in fact, not the wisest man.
For this is the command of God, as I would have you know, and I believe that to this day no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to the God. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike, not to take thought for your persons and your properties, but first and chiefly to care about the greatest improvement of the soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue come money, and every other good of man, public as well as private.
This is his search for truth, his philosophy. With that, Socrates travels everywhere and anywhere, and he speaks to anyone willing to have a conversation about truth and wisdom to no avail.
After a long consideration, I at last thought of a method of trying the question. I reflected that if I could only find a man wiser than myself, then I might go to the god with a refutation in my hand. I should say to him, "Here is a man who is wiser than I am, but you say that I was the wisest." Accordingly, I went to one who had the reputation of wisdom, and observed to him. His name I need not mention. He was a politician whom I selected for examination, and the result was as follows. When I began to talk with him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought wise by many, and wiser still by himself, and I went and tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise, and the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, "Well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is. For he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. In this latter particular, then, I seem to have slightly the advantage of him." Then I went to another who had still higher philosophical pretensions, and my conclusion was exactly the same. I made another enemy of him, and of many others beside him. After this, I went to one man after another, being not unconscious of the enmity which I provoked, and I lamented and feared this, but necessity was laid upon me. The word of God, I thought, ought to be considered first. And I said to myself, "Go, I must to all who appear to know, and found out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth, the result of my mission was just this. I found that the men in most repute were all but the most foolish, and that some inferior men were really wiser and better. I will tell you the tale of my wanderings and of the Herculean labors, as I may call them, which I endured only to find at last the oracle irrefutable. When I left the politicians, I went to the poets, tragic, dithyrambic, and all sorts, and there I said to myself, "You will be detected. Now you will find out that you are more ignorant than they are." Accordingly, I took them some of the most elaborate passages in their own writings and asked what was the meaning of them, thinking that they would teach me something. Will you believe me? I am almost ashamed to speak of this, but still I must say that there is hardly a person present who would not have talked better about their poetry than they did themselves. That showed me in an instant that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners or soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them, and the poets appeared to me to be in much in the same case. And I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry, they believed themselves to be the wisest of men in other things in which they were not wise. So I departed, conceiving myself to be superior to them for the same reason that I was superior to the politicians. At last, I went to the artisans, for I was conscious that I knew nothing at all, as I may say, and I was sure that they knew many fine things, and in this I was not mistaken, for they did know many things of which I was ignorant, and in this they certainly were wiser than I was. But I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error as the poets. Because they were good workmen, they thought they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their wisdom. Therefore I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or like them in both, and I made answer to myself in the oracle that I was better off as I was. This investigation has led to my having many enemies of the worst and most dangerous kind, and has given occasion also to many calamities. And I am called wise, for my listeners always imagine that I myself possess the wisdom which I find wanting in others. But the truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise, and in this oracle he means to say that the wisdom of men is little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates, he is only using my name as an illustration, as if he said, "He, O men, is the wisest, who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing. And so I go my way, obedient to the God, and make inquisition into the wisdom of anyone, whether citizen or stranger, who appears to be wise. And if he is not wise, then in vindication of the oracle, I show him that he is not wise. And this occupation quite absorbs me, and I have no time to give either to any public matter of interest or to any concern of my own, but I am in utter poverty by the reason of my devotion to the God.
That is where I believe Socrates' wisdom derives from. He understands that the only thing he knows is that he knows nothing. What society believes they know is out of civic faith and not rational knowledge. For if it is the truth, it can withstand inquiry of any kind. That's the truth that Socrates wants to discover, but it comes at a cost with the repeated charges against all philosophers.
Teaching things up in the clouds and under the earth, and having no gods, and making the worse appear the better cause. For they do not like to confess that their pretense of knowledge has been detected, which is the truth. And as they are numerous and ambitious and energetic, and are all in battle array and have persuasive tongues, they have filled your ears with their loud and inveterate calamities.
The second set of charges of impiety against Socrates were brought about by Meletus. Meletus claims that Socrates is a complete atheist and the lone corrupter of the young men of Athens. Can Socrates not believe in the same gods if his entire goal is to prove those same gods wrong about him being the wisest? Can Socrates be so corrupt that those who follow him are grown up into sensible men of reputation and status, not to come back and complain? Why haven't their friends and family brought charges to Socrates themselves? Or are these charges lies to make Socrates an example to those who think different?
Many of them I see in court. There is Crito, who is of the same age and of the same deme with myself. And there is Critobulus his son. Then again there is Lysanias of Cephetus. And also there is Antiphonus of Phasis. And there are the brothers of several who have associated with me. There is Nicostratus, the son of Theosdotides, and the brother of Theodotus. And there is Perillus, the son of Demodocus, and Adamantus, the son of Ariston, whose brother Plato is present, and Aeantodorus, who is the brother of Apollodorus, whom I also see. I might mention a great many others, any of whom Meletus should have produced as witnesses in the course of his speech, and let him still produce them if he has forgotten. I will make way for him, and let him say, if he has any testimony of the sort which he can produce. Nay, Athenians, the very opposite is true. For all these are ready to witness on behalf of the corrupter, of the destroyer of their kindred, as Meletus and Antinous call me. Not the corrupted youth only, there might been a motive for that, but their uncorrupted elder relatives. Why should they too support me with their testimony? Why indeed, except for the sake of truth and justice, and because they know that I am speaking the truth and that Meletus is lying.
Many men would lose their integrity, morals, and credit not to face death and avoid any charges. Socrates loathes this behavior as dishonorable and sarcastically says how men pretty much would do anything not to die as if they will live forever otherwise. To further his integrity, Socrates tells a story of his time in the military when he opposed his senator's order to collect the dead bodies, and he said how he would rather run the risk of having law and justice with him rather than take part in their injustice, knowing imprisonment and death would be the penalty if he didn't comply. Socrates shares of another story when he refused the tyrannical 30's orders to help arrest Leon of Salamis, which led to Leon's execution after capturing him when Socrates knew that disobeying the tyranny would implicate death as well.
I have said enough in answer to the charges of Meletus. Any elaborate defense is unnecessary. But as I was saying before, I certainly have many enemies, and this is what will be my destruction if I am destroyed. Of that I am certain, not Meletus, nor yet Anytus, but the envy and detraction of the world, which has been the death of many good men, and will probably be the death of many more. There is no danger of my being the last of them. Someone will say, "And are you not ashamed, Socrates, of a course of life which is likely to bring you to an untimely end?" To him I may fairly answer, "There you are mistaken. A man who is good for anything ought not to calculate the chance of living or dying. He ought only to consider whether in doing anything he is doing right or wrong, acting the part of a good man or of a bad. For wherever a man's place is, whether the place which he has chosen or that in which he has been placed by a commander, there he ought to remain in the hour of danger. He should not think of death or of anything but of disgrace. And this, O men of Athens, is a true saying. Strange indeed will be my conduct, O men of Athens, if I who, when I was ordered by the generals whom you chose to command me, remained where they placed me, like any other man facing death. If, I say now, when, as I conceive and imagine, God orders me to fulfill the philosopher's mission of searching into myself and other men, I were to desert my post through the fear of death, or of any other fear, that would indeed be strange, and I might justly be arraigned in court for denying the existence of the gods. If I disobeyed the oracle because I was afraid of death, then I should be fancying that if I was wise when I was not wise. For this fear of death is indeed the pretense of wisdom and not real wisdom, being the appearance of knowing the unknown. Since no one knows whether death, which they in their fear apprehend to be the greatest evil, may not be the greatest good. Is there not here conceit of knowledge, which is a disgraceful sort of ignorance? And this is the point in which, as I think, I am superior to men in general, and in which I might perhaps fancy myself wiser than other men, that, whereas I know but little of the world below, I do not suppose that I know. But I do know that injustice and disobedience to a better, whether God or man, is evil and dishonorable, and I will never fear or avoid a possible good rather than a certain evil. And therefore, if you let me go now, and reject the counsels of Anytus, who said that if I were not put to death, I ought not to have been prosecuted, and that if I escape now, your sons will be utterly ruined by listening to my words. If you say to me, Socrates, this time we will not mind Anytus, and will let you off, but upon one condition, that is not to inquire and speculate in this way any more, and that if you are caught doing this again, you shall die. If this was the condition on which you will let me go, I should reply, Men of Athens, I honor and love you, but I shall obey God rather than you. And while I have life and strength, I shall never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy, exhorting anyone whom I meet after my manner and convincing him. For this is the command of God, as I would have you know, and I believe that to this day no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to the God. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike, not to take thought for your persons and your properties, but first and chiefly to care about the greatest improvement of the soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue comes money, and every other good of men, public as well as private. This is my teaching, and if this is the doctrine which corrupts the youth, my influence is ruinous indeed. But if anyone says that this is not my teaching, he is speaking in untruth. Wherefore, O men of Athens, I say to you, do as Antinous bids or not as Antinous bids, and either acquit me or not, but whatever you do, know that I shall never alter my ways, not even if I have to die many times. I am a man, and like other men, a creature of flesh and bone, and not of wood and stone, as Homer says. And I have a family, yes, and sons, O Athenians, 3 in number, one of whom is growing up, and the other 2 are still young. And yet I will not bring any of them hither in order to petition you for an acquittal. And why not? Not from any self-will or disregard of you. Whether I am or am not afraid of death is another question, of which I will not now speak. But my reason simply is that I feel such conduct to be discreditable to myself and you and the whole state. One who has reached my years and who has a name for wisdom, whether deserved or not, ought not to debase himself. At any rate, the world has decided that Socrates is in some way superior to other men. And if those among you who are said to be superior in wisdom and courage, and any other virtue, demean themselves in this way, how shameful is their conduct. I have seen men of reputation, when they have been condemned, behaving in the strangest manner. They seemed to fancy that they were going to suffer something dreadful if they died, and that if they could be immortal if you only allowed them to live. And I think that they were a dishonor to the state, and that any stranger coming in would say of them that most of the eminent men of Athens, to whom the Athenians themselves give honor and command, are no better than women. And I say that these things ought not to be done by those of us who are of reputation. And if they are done, you ought not to permit them. You ought rather to show that you are more inclined to condemn, not the man who is quiet, but the man who gets up a doleful scene and makes the city ridiculous. But, setting aside the question of dishonor, there seems to be something wrong in petitioning a judge, and thus procuring an acquittal instead of informing and convincing him. For his duty is not to make a present of justice, but to give judgment, and he has sworn he will judge accordingly to the laws, and not according to his own good pleasure. And neither he nor we should get into the habit of perjuring ourselves. There can be no piety in that. Do not then require me to do what I consider dishonorable and impious and wrong, especially now when I am being tried for impiety on the indictment of Meletus. For if, O men of Athens, by force of persuasion and entreaty, I could overpower your oaths, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods, and can convict myself in my own defense of not believing in them. But that is not the case, for I do believe that there are gods, and in a far higher sense than that in which any of my accusers believe in them. And to you and to God I commit my cause, to be determined by you as is best for you and me.
In a close vote of 266 to 235, Socrates is convicted as guilty, and his punishment is death. In a memorable and almost poetic final speech, Socrates addresses his jury.
Let us reflect in another way, and we shall see that there is great reason to hope that death is a good for one of two things. Either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or, as men say, there is a change and migration of the soul from this world to another. Now if you suppose that there is no consciousness, but a sleep like the sleep of him who is undisturbed even by the sight of dreams, death will be an unspeakable gain. For if a person were to select the night in which his sleep was undisturbed even by dreams, and were to compare with this the other days and nights of his life, and then were to tell us of how many days and nights he had passed in the course of his life better and more pleasantly than this one, I think that any man, and I will not say a private man, but even the great king, will not find many such days or nights, when compared with the others. Now if death is like this, I say that to die is gain, for eternity is then only a single night. But if death is the journey to another place, and there, as men say, all the dead are, what good can be greater than this? If indeed when the pilgrim arrives in the world below, he is delivered from the professors of justice in this world, and finds the true judges who are said to give judgments there, that pilgrimage will be worth making. What would not a man give if he might converse with Orpheus and Musaeus and Hesiod and Homer? Nay, if this be true, let me die again and again. I too shall have a wonderful interest in a place where I can converse with Palamedes and Ajax and the other heroes of old who have suffered death through an unjust judgment, and there will be no small pleasure, as I think, in comparing my own sufferings with theirs. Above all, I shall be able to continue my search into true and false knowledge, as in this world I shall find out who is wise and who pretends to be wise and is not. What would not a man give to be able to examine the leader of the great Trojan expedition, or Odysseus, or Sisyphus, or numberless others, men and women too? What infinite delight would there be in conversing with them and asking them questions? For in that world they do not put a man to death for this, certainly not. For besides being happier in that world than in this, they will be immortal, if what is said is true. Wherefore, O judges, be of good cheer about death, and know this of a truth, that no evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. He and his are not neglected by the gods, nor has my own approaching end happened by mere chance. But I see clearly that to die and be released was better for me, and therefore the oracle gave no sign to flee. For which reason also I am not angry with my accusers or my condemners. They have done me no harm, although neither of them meant to do me any good, and for this I may gently blame them. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways, I to die and you to live. Which is better, God only knows.